Welcome to another episode of The Watchdog here on Mint Press. As you know, weekly we are going against the grain and covering stories in a way that the mainstream media never does. For that reason, we do require as much support from you as possible. So please like, share, and subscribe on this video. Just tap those buttons down there. Also, do support us through Patreon and other means. We massively appreciate it as the space gets smaller for truly independent media. Now, today we are joined by a very special guest. Professor Richard Wolff has taught on economics for many, many decades and is somebody whose work has been of great use to myself and others. And today we are here to discuss the imperiled economies of Europe and the United States in the shadow of war in Ukraine and post-COVID. To start with, I just wanted to ask you, Professor Wolff, thank you for joining us, firstly.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So to start with, I wanted to ask you, recently we saw an economist based in Helsinki, Tuomas Malinen, say the following. He said, "I'm telling you people that the situation in Europe is much worse than many understand. We are essentially on the brink of another banking crisis, a collapse of our industrial base and households, and thus on the brink of the collapse of our economies." Now, when we look at the inflation in Latvia, we see 21.5%, in Estonia, something like 23%, in Lithuania, 22.4%. And of course, in Britain, where I am now in London, it is between 10 and 12%. So, Professor Wolff, would you say that Tuomas Malinen is right?
I don't know if he's right, but I do know that he is, unfortunately, in the range of what might be right, that there are definitely signs that could make us worry about what he's having to say. He may be right. I'm not quite ready to go there yet, but that's not a reflection on what he's doing. He is looking at indices that are there, and he's drawing a conclusion about where they might take Europe. I think he's onto something. And if I might, let me tell you why. I saw an amazing statistic this morning. It said that if you add up what the UK and the rest of Europe are spending or proposing to spend to try to cope with the inflation, particularly of oil and gas and energy in general, the rise in prices of those things, 2, 3, 4 times what they once were, they're coming up with a total of 500 billion euros or dollars. These days, they're the same as they haven't been before, which is itself a sign of what is happening to the European economy. But I then did a little number of the work economists do. I asked a simple question. What is the GDP of Ukraine? Because clearly the rise in the price of energy has to do not so much with the war, but with the sanctions that the Europeans and the Americans imposed on Russia after the invasion of Ukraine. So how big an economy is Ukraine? And the answer is, in the last year for which we have numbers, 2020, I believe it is, the GDP, the total output of goods and services in Ukraine by Ukrainians, was about $156 billion. The amount spent on just one consequence, rising energy prices, of that war is multiple times the total output. We could have doubled, tripled everybody's income and wealth in Ukraine if we had avoided this war. And obviously, we would have also then avoided the terrible loss of life, the terrible destruction that we see every day in images that come from Ukraine. This is therefore a sign of a disconnect between cause and effect, between a problem and a solution. And that makes what your Finnish economist says begin to make sense, that maybe we have desperate politicians who've linked their careers to this war in Ukraine and the response of the collective West, and they can't back down from that without losing total face. And therefore, they're willing to spend to the last dollar of their people's taxes to hold on to a situation that is spinning badly out of control. And if I could, one more thing. You know, it's been a nightmare of Europe. And I'm an American citizen. I was born here. But my father was born in France and my mother was born in Germany. So I speak those languages. I keep track of events in Europe with enormous interest. I have family that remain in Europe. And so it's been a nightmare for centuries that Europe would be caught in a destructive way between the United States on the one hand, and they used to be the Soviet Union, but you can substitute Russia/China because they're very close now as the alternative, and that these two will have a conflict, and they will resolve their conflict by getting rid of Europe. I mean, solve it at the expense of Europe, that it'll be caught in between. That's been from Metternich to Napoleon. I mean, it's a long history. And it might now be coming true in a way that no one expected, sort of coming around the corner, suddenly confronting, because there's a joke here in the United States where I'm located, which is that the United States is now committed to fight this war in Ukraine to the last Ukrainian. And now you might add, maybe we're willing to fight the war to the European, to the last European who can freeze or who can smoke coal smoke and get polluted by it. I mean, it's remarkable what we are watching.
Also, I think it's important that people have, one of the great things about what you do is you break down quite complex economic issues into very understandable language for people to understand who haven't necessarily studied economics before. And one of the things I think it would be great to break down for our audience, what exactly is inflation?
Good. I'm glad to do that. And I'm glad to make it understandable. I've been a teacher all my life, and my father was a teacher. And what he taught me was that the job of the teacher is to do exactly what you just said, to spend a little extra time to kind of get it clear so that you can convey it to others who have other things to do with their lives and time. So I'm glad to do it. And inflation is a very simple thing, often dealt with as if it were so complicated that mere mortal people can't master it. Don't be fooled. Don't be misled. That is not true. Here it is. An inflation is a general increase in prices. That's all it ever meant. That's what it means today. It doesn't mean every price goes up. Some can go down, but in general, they're going up. It doesn't mean every price goes up by the same amount. That never happens. But it means a general increase in prices. So when you hear Britain, it's 10 to 12%, or here in the United States, it's 8 to 9%. And just as a footnote, so people don't think it's everywhere, the inflation right now in the People's Republic of China is 2.5%. There is no need to have the inflations the way we do. Not all countries in the world do, not by a long shot. And particularly important countries don't. But we have one. So now let's go through the simple economics. How do prices go up? If there's an inflation and it means rising prices, one of the first questions you can ask is who's raising the prices? Who does that? And the answer is a very small minority of the people. They are called employers. The class of employers has as one of its prerogatives, one of its exclusive rights, the right to set prices. They sit in a room and they decide the price of whatever it is we sell will go up, will go down, stay the same. They are free in a free enterprise system to do that. So if you're wondering where an inflation comes from, the first answer that should come out of your mouth is employers have decided to raise prices, because otherwise inflations don't happen. All right, now the next question. Why would employers do that? Now, the answer to that question is the first line in every textbook of economics, in every business school, and I've taught at them, as in any other university system. You teach people that capitalist enterprises run by the employers within them make decisions, all decisions, focused on what they call the bottom line, profitability. Do you hire a worker or not? Do you buy a truck or a lorry or not? Do you expand your factory? Do you move to another part of the world? All of these daily business decisions are decided as the basic standard. Will it improve my profits? Then I do it. And will it diminish my profits? Then I will avoid it. So the honest answer to why we have an inflation is this. Employers decided it would be more profitable to raise the price than not to. And that's why they didn't do that before the war in Ukraine, before the catastrophe of COVID-19 and so on. The conditions were different, and they decided they would be more profitable to not raise the price and thereby be able to sell a bit more. They've changed their mind. But now let's be honest with one another, which the mainstream media works so hard to avoid. The vast majority of us are employees, not employers. We have nothing to do with raising prices. That's not our job. Most of you, like me, have noticed in our lifetimes that as employees, we were never given the job or the task of deciding what the prices were. Our employers would have laughed at the very idea. So we're left having to pay the higher prices, but we are excluded from participating in it. You know what that is? That's the opposite of democracy. We have to live with a decision, raising the price, over which we have no direct participation, control, or involvement. Therefore, there is no other honest answer than to say, we have an inflation because a tiny minority, I would guess less than 1% of the populations of everyone listening to this, every country that's in on this conversation, less than 1% of your people are employers. And they're making a decision that is having catastrophic implications for the mass of people. This is undemocratic as well as economically very painful. Except, of course, for the people who set the prices, because they're doing it to make a profit. They wouldn't be doing it if it were not profitable. So we're going to see even more inequality emerge from this. Now to the first point, your Finnish guest. This is so extreme. This is so awful. And let's remember, this is being imposed on an employee class that just went through one of the worst crashes of capitalism in its history, the 2020-2021 crash, one of the worst public health disasters of modern history, a terrible inflation on top of that. I mean, a government would not want to do that to the mass of the people because it isn't going to make it popular and it isn't going to make it stronger. And in fact, all the governments are trembling as they do all of this, speaking about a freezing winter, speaking about all of these extreme measures. Wow. So we know that these leaders are doing desperate things, which takes us back to maybe the situation, as your Finnish economist suggests, is a way lot worse than we have been led to believe.
Also, we are on the brink of a winter of discontent discontent in England. For example, you have the workers for Royal Mail. Of course, this was one of the key functions of the British state, which now the majority shareholder in it is a company based in the tax haven of Luxembourg. You have the example of the railways, where many of the companies which actually operate the trains not own them, because the trains are owned by rolling stock companies who get paid a fixed rate, whatever happens. So for instance, throughout COVID, these were companies that were getting fixed rate of rent of their trains. But then the companies that actually operate the trains are in some cases Dutch state companies, German state companies, even Italian state companies. Now, the interesting question here is the big campaign in England today is for wages in line with inflation. Now, the argument which is often put against those advocating for wages in line with inflation, because let's be clear, if inflation is at 11.7% and you offer us a 5% increase in our wages, that's in real terms a pay cut, right? But the argument that's being made against those taking industrial action is that if you raise wages across the board, then you increase inflation overall. How do you respond to that argument, Professor Wolff?
Well, again, let me do the simple economics. If you ask most employers the embarrassing question, why did you raise your prices? Because that's what the inflation is. You did that. They don't want to answer you the way I did. They don't want to tell you they did it because it's the profitable decision to make, because that doesn't ring well in the minds of the mass of people, because they don't get profits. So the idea that it's good for profits kind of means not good for me. I don't live off profits. I live off wages. So I don't want to be told that I'm going to suffer a diminution in my standard of living with 5%, which, remember, many don't even get that. But if I get 5%, but the prices all go up 10 or 12, I'm behind, and by a lot, let alone if this goes on for years. So I don't want to hear that. So employers aren't stupid. They don't tell you what they know you don't want to hear. Here's their number one alternative explanation. All over the world, all over the United States right now, we are raising prices because, get ready now, other people are raising prices. We buy electricity, the price went up. We buy inputs of raw materials, the price went up. We buy machines, we buy, everything goes up, and we have to. Okay, let's remember that. If you want to stop an inflation, you would have to stop the people raising the prices, because they're becoming the excuse for still other employers. But you can't single out the workers, tell them to do without a wage increase, because it'll proliferate. Wait, stop. If you don't want the cause to happen, fine. You can decide, by the way people have, not to let wages go up, or not to have them go up by a lot, but then you have to do the same to the prices. And let me give you an example of how that was done. I'll have to give it from my country, because I know the history here better than I know your history. So in the United States, we had a bad inflation back in 1970, 1971, very bad. And the then president, a conservative Republican named Richard Nixon, went on radio and television 15th of August, 1971. And he declared, as of tomorrow morning, president of the country says, as of tomorrow morning, any employer who raises the price of whatever it is his enterprise produces, here's what I'm going to tell you. If you do that, I will send the police to your place of business. You will be arrested. Your price increase will be rescinded, and you will go to jail. Whoa. He then said to every worker and every labor union, if you raise the wages of your workers, the same will happen to you. I am therefore declaring what came to be known as a price wage freeze. The inflation stopped on a dime. But even that Republican in those days wouldn't have dared suggest that the workers have their wages frozen or limited, while the capitalists, nothing? What? That would have been a political suicide, instantaneous, and he knew it. So that was out of the question. My response then and now is we have two problems. We have an inflation, but we have an inherited problem of an extreme disparity between the rich and the poor in this country. You have that in England for sure, maybe even worse than here. So you've always wanted to do something about it. In this country, at least, every politician, Republican and Democrat alike, gives a speech once or twice a year in which he or she bemoans the inequality about which we must be concerned. Okay, I have a solution. Freeze the prices, allow the wages to go up 3 to 5% a year. That way, you stop the inflation and you improve the inequality of incomes all at one time. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And there's a reason why you've never heard anyone say that, because now what is politically possible was unthinkable by conservatives in 1971, but is normal discourse. Here in the United States, where the wage price freeze happened, there's not a word about it. Our government, Mr. Biden in the presidency, Mr. Powell, who runs our central bank, here called the Federal Reserve, they are discussing dealing with the inflation, as they are in Europe, by raising interest rates, as if that were the only way. It isn't. As if the wage price freeze hasn't been used in modern history. It has. In Europe and North America, it has. But there's a kind of taboo. It's like discussing, I don't know, sex problems or something. You don't do that. So you pretend that you have to raise interest rates. If I'm not mistaken, the European Central Bank raised it by 0.75 of a point yesterday. Wow. You know what that means? It means every person who has debts, which nowadays is virtually everybody, is now going to be hurt. Hurt by COVID, hurt by the crash, hurt by inflation, and now hurt by the one solution the government found to inflation that has the impact worst to the poorest people. Why? Because they're the ones who have to borrow the most and who can afford this the least. I mean, the injustice here is so monumental that I'm taken back to your Finnish Economist. This is so extreme once you understand it, that it does suggest that behind it, there must be a very scary prospect to have people as desperate as these leaders are to impose these kinds of solutions for the problems their capitalism has created.
Well, what we're talking about here is Robin Hood in reversal,
Yes,
transfers
exactly.
of wealth upwards. And, in England, we have just had Liz Truss come in as Prime Minister, elected by a party membership that represents 0.3% of the population. And she has brought forth the novel idea that the way you get out of the cost of living crisis is you, for the first time in British history, cut taxes on the rich and get into trickle-down economics. Now, Professor Wolff, do you have a response to those advocates of trickle-down economics?
Yes, I have several. And you pardon my smiling. I am not smiling at your question, which is excellent. I'm just smiling that we are yet again going to have to explain to people the absurdity of this really stretch of an argument. Look, it's hard to be very wealthy at a time when the wealthy get wealthier and everybody is in trouble. It is difficult. And they have to stretch a long way to come up with some rationalization for what is basically organized thievery. But all right, so much sympathy for them. So here's the idea. We call it here the laugher curve, not because you should laugh at it, although you should, but it happens that the man who got famous saying it out loud was a man named Laffer, and so it's called the Laffer idea. And yes, it's the idea you cut taxes on the rich, step one. The rich are so happy with this extra money they have because they don't have to pay taxes the way they used to, that they take that money that they don't spend on taxes and they rush out and invest it in producing goods and services, hiring more workers. And oh boy, will we will be in great shape. Notice the lovely logic. Do what a rich capitalist wants most, lower the taxes, and wonderful things will happen to everybody. Okay, you don't need rocket science to see through this. Step one, when you cut the taxes on the rich, all you're doing is giving the rich more money. That money used to go to the government, which at least on some level has a national health service, maintains the roads, helps the hospitals function, and all the rest of it. No one wants to ask the question, gee, if you cut back on what you give the government, what will that mean? Put that aside. More heroic is the notion the capitalists who pay less in taxes now that you've cut their taxes will rush out to invest and hire people. But I can give you 1,000 examples from US history, UK history, European history, Japanese history, whatever you want, and show you countless examples where taxes were cut and they didn't do that. Remember, they are free enterprises. They are free to take the reduction of their taxes and do whatever they want with it. The last time we did that in this country, here's one of the results you might enjoy. President Trump gave a massive tax cut to business and the rich, just the sort that your genius new leader thought up back in December of 2017. I could give you many more examples, but that's the most recent and the largest. Did they run out and invest? No. Here's one of the things they did. They engaged in a spectacular program which is called stock buybacks. Let me briefly explain. It's not complicated. A company, taxes are lowered. Now they have a pot of money that they used to have to give the government each year in taxes. They don't now. Taxes were cut. Mr. Trump was very proud. And they took the money and they went into the stock market to buy shares of their own stock. So imagine IBM or General Motors or Apple Computer, any of them that you know the names of, taking a bunch of money and ordering their stockbroker to buy shares of their own company on the market. That's called a stock buyback. Well, what does that do? Let's follow the money. Number one, it drives up the price of the shares on the market because suddenly there's a purchase of lots of them. Okay, why is that good? Every shareholder in General Motors is going to be very pleased. Wow, my stocks are worth more because the company bought back the shares. Nobody gets hired when that happens. They're not hiring anybody. They're not producing anything. They're just buying their shares. Is it just the shareholder? Well, let's stop and look. 10% of shareholders in the United States own 80% of the shares. In other words, this is good for the people who are already rich enough to own shares. So this is an act that's good for the rich shareholder. But better, turns out that top executives of many companies are also major shareholders, but they often have their contracts written so that part of their pay, and in some cases all of their pay, is linked to the performance of shares on the market. So by deciding to take the tax cut that Trump gave them, buy their shares, drive up the price, their annual salary goes from 10 million pounds to 20 million pounds. So the top executives, let me remind you, already the very rich of our society, get even more. Nobody got hired, no expansion of production. Are they free to do this? Yes. Are they free today to do this? Yes. Were they free 2, 4, 6, 10, 12 years ago? In some cases, yes, some cases, no. There used to be laws preventing stock buybacks or limiting them. I believe you have them in some of the European countries. We, of course, being the land of the free and the home of the brave, we have no limits on stock buyback. It's a scandal, in short. Laffer curve is to be laughed at. It leaves out the freedom of the employer class to take their tax cut monies and invest them abroad, buy back their shares. I mean, buy treasury security. They can do whatever they want. The promise that this will be good for everybody is a promise made by a person who cannot know that, so it's just a lie, and who can't even make it happen, especially if they're a conservative who claim to believe that the government should not involve itself too much in the economy. I mean, it is to be impolite for a moment, I hope this doesn't offend anyone, it's what we call here in America a crock. I won't tell you what it's a crock of, you can imagine.
Well, so really what we're dealing with here is the way in which the free market economy is one thing in theory, but is another thing in practice. Could you just break down for the viewers, what's the free market economy in theory, but then how is that sort of different in the way that it functions in the day-to-day?
A free market economy, there are a lot of synonyms: laissez-faire economy, liberal economy, libertarian, that's a hot word these days, all means pretty much the same thing, that the government has a minimal role of intervening in the economy. The government can have an army to fight off foreigners or whatever. It can do a variety of things, but it should leave the economy alone. The economy should be owned by private individuals who have no position in any state apparatus or authority, and who buy and sell to one another by contracts and agreements they reach in an exchange process we call free market, where the word free simply means free of government intervention. The word free has no other meaning than that in that context. And the argument is this is a wonderful way, a magical way to run an economy. I mean, you might go so far, I do in fact, that you might go so far as to say that the religion of modern society isn't about gods and angels and all that religion once was about. It's really about bending over and praying to the free market as your God. In the debates in the United States Congress, the most common phrase you can hear is, let the market decide, or that should be resolved by the free market, as if it were anthropomorphized, that it was like a person, like a God maybe, who can make sure the outcome is what's best for all of us, because as we know, God loves us all. Okay, now let's look at the reality of what's going on. What does a market do? The most important thing to understand about a market is how it solves a problem that occurs every minute of every day of every year. And that problem is the following. The people who produce goods for sale cannot know when they're going to make production, what the situation will be a week later, a month later, a year later, because it always takes time between when you initiate any production process and the product comes out at the other end. Even if you're a service, you start your haircut at a certain point, it takes time before you're done. But producing goods, it can take months or years. That means, since the producer has to make the decision, that employer again, that tiny under 1% of our people, that employer class, they have to make a guess, that's all they can, about what the situation will be months or years down the road when they come to sell. And that means it's equally possible that they will be offering for sale more or less than people want to buy at whatever price they set. That's the normal situation. And it's not a flaw. I mean, nobody can read the future. We don't have that yet. And a lot of people fake that, but we all kind of know it's not doable. So the normal process for every market is how to work that out. What are you going to do? And here's what markets do. I'm going to use the example of a situation where there's something in short supply, or if you like, a shortage. Couldn't be of apple pie. It could be of gas and oil, could be of wheat, whatever. Okay, what does a market do when there's not enough of something? Well, the first thing to think about is the people who want it, who came to the market because they need or want wheat or apple pie or oil and gas, they don't want to be the ones who have to do without. There's not enough. And so someone who wants it, who came to market to get it, who thought they could get it at whatever X dollars or X pounds per, they know they're not going to get it because somebody isn't. And so their reaction, forgive them for being a moment selfish, their reaction is, I don't want to be the one left without. How do I avoid that? Answer, in a market system, I offer the seller, I'm a buyer, more. You're asking $10. I tell you what, give me what I know is in short supply. Give me some of what you have, and I'll make it worth your while. I'll give you 11, or I'll give you 12 instead of 10. The other person who, just like me, doesn't want to be the one left without, goes me one better. You know, it's like a poker game. I'm going to give you 13 or 14. Notice what's happening. The price of the item is going up because the employer is greedy and likes what he sees. He's going to do better than he thought he would. So the employer lets the bidding go on, enjoying the result. Meanwhile, what happens is the poorest buyer is the one who barely had enough money to pay the initial price, the asking price of $10. He or she can't go along. They drop out. They no longer are buyers because they have been priced out of the market. And so this process keeps going until all that's left are the buyers who are now smaller in number, satisfied with the supply that was brought. So the deal gets done at whatever the higher price ended up being, let's say $14.82 per, and we have the market cleared. We have the market result. Now let's look at that market result. In the event of a scarcity in a market system, what you have is an allocation of whatever is scarce to the people who are the richest buyers in the community. It's a system that systematically screws the poorer people. It's not an efficient system. It's a cruel system. It heaps onto the poor humiliation and further poverty by freezing them out. No ethical system that I know of, not Christian, not Judaic, not Islamic, none would call that an ethical arrangement. If there's a shortage, let's distribute it according to people's needs. If the item in short supply is milk, here's what it means. A rich person who's happy to bid up the price of milk will take home the milk and enjoy feeding it to the cats that they keep as pets, whereas the poor family with 10 children will have to do without the milk for their kids, because that's how markets work. Last point. Some economists who like capitalism and who like markets, you probably have guessed by now that I'm not one of them, but those who like it have a defense. They say, no, wait a minute. When the price is driven up, maybe that's bad, but it has a good side effect. It induces capitalists elsewhere to come into that business and produce more because they're attractive by the nice high price that the shortage fetched. This is a lovely story. It has one fatal flaw. Capitalists aren't stupid. They know that too. They know that if you have a shortage and it drives the price up, you're not going to enjoy that very long if indeed other capitalists come in to produce it and drive the price back down. So one of the first things every capitalist learns is don't let that happen. Erect what we call in economics barriers to entry. It means you create, and there are loads of ways of doing this, you make it hard and difficult, maybe get the purchased politician you have in your pocket to pass some law that makes it hard for people to do it. Guess what? Capitalists have been very successful, learning from the shortages they didn't plan how to evolve into a system where those shortages are maintained. And just in case that's not enough, one more invention. If you can't be sure that you've done it just right with the shortage, work on the other side. Build up the demand for whatever it is you sell, because then you can always kind of have a shortage because you're making the demand go up. And the way capitalism does that is by inventing a whole new industry, and that's called advertising. Spending billions and billions to convince you that if only you buy this particular soap made by this particular company and you use it in the shower every day, your sex life will become fantastic, and therefore you should buy this. The market is, for any business of any size, an institution to be manipulated, and manipulated to squeeze money out of the poor and to gather it into the hands of the rich while manipulating the supply and the demand. The notion that a free market without the government stepping in is some boon to all of us is, as I tried to suggest earlier, part of that crock.
Brilliant. Richard, would you be able to give us a breakdown of quantitative easing?
Yes. Quantitative easing is one of those examples where economists take a basically simple idea and make it so complicated, equip it with such jargon that most people, educated or not, eventually turn away. I want to give credit where it's due. The Economist didn't invent that. They borrowed it from the legal profession. You know, in the legal profession, if I take your shirt when you're not looking and I keep it in my house and I don't let you get at it, we call that theft or stealing. I have taken a piece of property that belongs to you and I've taken it away from you. This doesn't require a lot of complication. And if I go to the police and we have a case in a court of law, I explain what happened, you give whatever story you want, and someone decides, what needs to be done here. Lawyers have encrusted this with language and complexity. Why? Because it makes the issue clearer? Not at all. Because it changes the outcome? Not much. What's it about? It means that if something happens to you, like you lose your shirt, or I get sued, I can't handle it myself. Why? Is the issue difficult? No, it isn't. But I don't know that jargon. I don't know that language. I don't know all the complex procedures. I hire a lawyer, pay him or her a great deal of money, and you know what they do? They explain back to me the simplicity that I would have been able to understand, but for the interference of the legal profession. So the economists learned, whoa, that's how to become much better paid than we used to be, sort of like lawyers. We can make economics so complicated, so convoluted, that we have to get paid big bucks to explain back to people. So let me give you an example. One of the ways that capitalism has required a government, even as it rails against the government being a burden and we don't need it, and the free market is one, all that stuff. You might have noticed that the governments we all live with are very big, dispense huge amounts of money and are very powerful. So all of this capitalist noise about the government coexists with its opposite in reality. Why? Because capitalism as a system has a very serious problem. It actually has quite a few. But one that I want you to think about is instability. This is a bizarre system. On average, every 4 to 7 years, it crashes. Wherever it has settled, Asia, Europe, Africa, North America, doesn't make any difference. Wherever capitalism settles, boom, you get what they call the business cycle. There are a lot of words for it because it is such an ever-present reality. The National Bureau of Economic Research in the United States here keeps track of all of the ups and downs, the periodicity, it's called, of the capitalist system. Every 4 to 7 years, a crash. Some of the crashes are shallow, don't cut very deep, and don't last very long. Some of them cut very deep and last very long. To date, the worst one, the 1930s, the Great Depression, begins in 1929, lasts until 1940, 11 years. At the height, for example, the unemployment rate was 25% here in the United States, 1933. That means 1 out of 4 workers was unemployed, which means every single American family had either father, mother, cousin, aunt, uncle out of work, and a burden on a family that was in trouble financially already before that person lost their job. Very hard time, very hard time. That kind of instability is dangerous. If every 4 to 7 years you run through the economy, throw millions of people out of work, make millions of communities unable to raise taxes on the people that have no job and therefore unable to fund public and municipal services, you have social collapse. It's dangerous for capitalism. So they brought in the government, they had no choice, to try to prevent this cycle, this instability. If you can't prevent it, at least moderate it, make it cut less deep, make it last less long. The greatest theorist of how and why you have to do this, British, John Maynard Keynes, writes his book, The General Theory, in the middle of the Great Depression. It was first published, if I remember, 1936. So clearly a product of a man living in the midst of a social and economic collapse. Just one of the half dozen basic things Keynes taught us you need to do for the government to try to stop this horrible instability is manipulating the money supply. Remember, money is another thing that the system has had to give to the government. Most capitalist economies tried for a while to let money be done by private enterprises, private banks. That was so chaotic, so corrupt that they stopped. And despite their ideology of laissez-faire, the government was given the job. That's why the money you have is printed by the government, and you know it. Okay, so the government now controls the money. So Keynes said, given that, here's one of the ways the government can intervene. It can pump money in to the economy, or it can pull it out. And it should use that power to increase the money in circulation or to decrease it. When you decrease it, when you literally pull money out of the economy, it's called quantitative tightening. And when you pump new money, print it and dump it into the economy, it's called quantitative easing. Don't ask me why it's called that, because then I would have to use profanity about my fellow economists, and I don't want to do that. So that's all it is. The hope, by the way, very crude, very simple. The hope is if the government throws money into the economy, more people will have money. They will go out and buy things. Businesses will do that. Individuals will do that. And somehow that will stimulate the economy, and you won't have as bad a downturn as you would have had otherwise. That's it. It's like what we call here in football a Hail Mary pass, where you throw the football down the field and you bless yourself or whatever religion you have and hope that the right person catches the ball at the other end of the field. That's all this money game is. If, for example, over the last 10 or 15 years, we have had more quantitative easing than ever before in peacetime in American history. We have pumped in because our capitalist system is in terrible, deep difficulty, just like your Finnish economist is speculating. Only I could do it for the United States too, just as he did it for Europe. We've had a hard time. And so our central bank, the Federal Reserve System, has been quantitatively easing like crazy. But guess what? Most of that money went directly into the stock market, where it bid up the prices of shares, which our top 10% were only too happy to see. It didn't create jobs. It didn't create economic growth. Quite the contrary. So what they threw the pass, but it wasn't caught by one of ours. And so we've had a stock market, which, by the way, over this year, from January to right now, has been going down into the toilet because it went up way too far because of the quantitative easing. And so now it's going. The chaos, the disorder, the injustice of capitalism always makes folks like us end up, whatever we do, with a question to our audience. Why does anyone support a system that works like this? Why? What level of delusion is going on here? Perfectly smart people living through it seem frighteningly hesitant to face that really we can do better than this. To think that we can't is a kind of insult to the human race none of us should utter and none of us should tolerate.
Absolutely. Amazingly put. I mean, also the question in terms of the war in Ukraine and the ramifications of it, seeing these unprecedented sanctions on Russia, what that has in effect done is push possibly around 3 billion people in Russia, India, and China into trading with each other in currencies other than the dollar. Right. This seems to me a very short-sighted policy. What could be the ramifications of these steps, especially for the dollar, Professor?
Okay. You're right. It is very short-sighted, and it then raises again the question, why would you be doing something as short-sighted and as clearly dangerous for you? And why would you still do it? Why wouldn't you say, as, for example, American leaders have said for decades, that one of the most important foreign policy objectives is to not have Russia and China together, and for sure not to have India get closer to Russia. I mean, wow. What desperation would make you give up on this? So let's take a look. Every empire, and it's important that I say this to someone in England, every empire tells the following story. It emerges, it gets born, it evolves over time, and then it dies. The Greek empires, the Roman Empire, the British Empire. Okay, we see the pattern. There's little reason to believe that anything has happened to stop that pattern. Literally, the United States, as an initial colony of Britain, was part of the British Empire, emerged out of it, decided it wanted to become an empire itself, had 2 wars with England about all of that, 1776, 1812. And then finally, the British realized they could not destroy it. They could not defeat it militarily. They came to terms with it, and the American empire emerged, and the British and Americans reversed their role. From the United States being a small minor colony of Britain, you have now arrived at the reverse position. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but we all know that. And we can deny it until we're blue in the face, won't change it one iota. But the problem is that the United States has had a fantastic ride up. For the last century, it's been the ascendant empire. And there is no nice way to say this, so I'm going to be blunt. It's over. And just as the British, to this day, in large numbers, have not yet gotten their heads wrapped around the fact that that empire is over, we're at an earlier stage, so many more Americans are having delusions that this empire, unlike every other one, will last forever, and that no other empire will emerge, certainly not one of the poorest places on earth. If Americans know anything about China, it's over the last century they read a major novel, a novel written by an American woman named Pearl Buck. If you're ever interested in how Americans image China, it's through the novels of Pearl Buck. Good novels, by the way, but descriptive of levels of poverty that once you read them, you will never forget them. They are, the old joke, you cannot unsee something you've seen. Well, those books are powerful enough to do that. The most important, if you're interested, it's called, I believe, The Good Earth of Pearl Buck. Anyway, the Chinese is the ascendant empire. I mean, again, if you're an economist, this is obvious. You've had 30, 40 years now to understand it. You have to begin somewhere to register it. Let me give you a couple of statistics just so it gels in your mind. As of the latest data, a year and a half old, the GDP of Russia is about $1.5 trillion. 1.5. The GDP of the United States, $21 trillion. So everyone should understand. U.S., Russia, that's David and Goliath. Okay? That's what it is, except the reverse. U.S. plays role of Goliath, China plays role of David, which, for those of you who know the biblical story and how it ended, should worry you. That's why I chose it. Okay. Where does China fit? 15 trillion. In other words, China is a serious competitor of the United States in a way that Russia, before and after 1989, never was, will not be in the foreseeable future. China will. Why? Because for the last 30 years, the average rate of growth of the GDP of the United States has been between, I'll be generous, 2 and 3% a year. The average rate of growth of GDP in China over the same 30-year period has been between 6 and 9%. In other words, the Chinese economy is growing 3 times faster than the U.S. That's why they're the competitor that they are. They can produce everything we can. Their high tech is as high as our high tech. They are the next empire. They have figured out, and by the way, I'm not endorsing them. This is not a society whose every aspect is wonderful. Nothing of the sort. I'm just being an economist telling you some basic facts which you need to keep in mind so you don't get distracted by noise. Here's the reality. The Chinese figured out how to put together public and private enterprises. They are more of a mixed economy than the United States or Russia or the Soviet Union ever were. The Soviet Union went way further in the state capitalist approach. In other words, you have an employer and employees, but the state is the employer. State apparatus is the employer, not private boards of directors elected by shareholders. No. The government is the employer and employs the population as a whole. In private enterprise, as we know, it's private individuals who invest in companies that are run by private. The Chinese have a really mixed system. a very large public sector, a very large private sector, split between domestic Chinese private capitalists and foreign, Japanese, British, American, and so on. And all of that managed by a powerful Communist Party. That recipe has proven itself for 30 years now, that's a long time, to be better able to manage economic growth than anybody else. The United States doesn't come close, nor does any European company. You have to face that. Like it, don't like it, that's another matter. But that's the reality. That's why they've caught up. That's why they are the monster in the world economy, compared to which the Soviet Union, Russia, is a footnote. That is the great struggle of our time. That's what Ukraine is about. It is an effort late in the day to confront a reality. The sanctions imposed on Russia, referred to in the press here as, quote, the mother of all sanctions. Interesting choice, because that phrase was evident back in 2017, 2018, to describe what Trump was doing to China, the tariff wars, the trade wars. They were the biggest program of sanctions. They were there to slow down the Chinese, to impede. We arrested executives. We banned Huawei Corporation from functioning. We tried to get Europeans to do likewise, et cetera, et cetera. But it's too little. It's too late. It always is eventually in every empire when it gets to the point. Earlier, they were able to do it. They did it, but not now. Not now. They defeated the Germans who wanted to contest their hegemony. They defeated the Japanese who wanted to contest. They thought they could do it again, but they can't. They lost in Vietnam. They lost in Afghanistan. They lost, and it's not lost on them at the top. They are losing. They don't know what to do. So weakening China's Russian ally ends up being worth the disruption to the European economy, to the European-American alliance. Make no mistake, the celebrations of we're all in this together are very thin. As the cost of this mounts, the popular notion, and let me be very honest with you, most Americans could not find Ukraine on the map and don't care. I'm not defending it. I'm not celebrating it, nothing. But it's the truth of the situation. And if you dare connect, and our leaders try not to, but if you dare connect the war in some way with the suffering of the working class in the United States, the war will come to a crashing end, and it will not be good for the United States or for Europe. So you're watching a kind of ersatz warfare. Jokes in this country abound how we are fighting to the last Ukrainian. You could nowadays add to the last frozen European, or to the last European breathing deeply into the coal fumes now that you're all rebuilding your coal burning apparatus. I mean, this is remarkable a situation. And none of this, because there are a lot of people who get upset when they hear this, none of this says that the Chinese don't have enormous problems in their economy. They do. So do the Russians. This is different. They have all kinds of problems, may take them in all kinds of directions. But we have now evidence of 30 years, which is an immense time, of performance, of achievement, of growth. And that has to be confronted. You can be very sure it's confronted by all the leading capitalists in this country. I have been to countless meetings. I know this personally. And the folks at the top in our military and our government, they know it too. They just don't know what to do about it. American companies have flocked to China and continue to do so for a simple reason. The Chinese laborer is a disciplined, hard working, productive worker at a wage still way below what an American will accept. And they have the biggest, fastest growing middle class to sell to. Every capitalist learns you want to succeed, you go where the profits are high and the growth is robust. If you follow that dictum, as you were taught to do in business school, you want to be in on China. And they are, and they have been. And if you don't, if you really make a turn away from that and become nationalistic, if you actually don't just have rhetoric about bringing manufacturing back to the United States, and let me assure you, to this point, it's all rhetoric. The reality is very small, insignificant. But if it becomes real, which it could, then you're going to have a whole new problem. You're going to have to pay Americans much lower, or else you can't compete in the world. You close yourself off, but the rest of the world is going to keep going, and you're not. We understand that. Adam Smith explained it to us, and a million people have done it over and over again ever since. So we have to face these things, stop living in a world as if the United States was still in this enormous, it's a rich country, it's militarily a very powerful country. I don't shortchange any of that. That's all true. That has to be faced. But it's not the only truth. And to live in a world where you imagine it might be is to mean you're going to have disappointment after disappointment into the future. That's sad, really sad. It's like encountering somebody, I don't know, in Spain, I'll pick a country, who somehow still thinks Spain is what it once was. You know, the great empire of the world. It isn't. It's a little country on the Iberian Peninsula. It's important. It has every right to be proud of its culture and all that. But an economic powerhouse, I mean, it's just, no, that's over.
And of course, the United States is over $1 trillion in debt to China. In a way, what we've kind of laid out could be seen as the way in which this Ukraine war has served a similar, possibly a similar role to the dollar that the Suez Canal War posed to the pound sterling, possibly. Professor Wolff?
The issue with the dollar, just one foot, the issue with the dollar, that's just, you know, it's more important than a footnote, but it has for years been a source of bitter anger, not just in the Soviet Union or China, but across the world. It's an enormous subsidy to the United States that the dollar is the global currency. Basically, people should understand, if everybody in the world has to hold dollars because they do business in dollars, hold it in their bank account, hold it in their central bank, it means that the United States gets to import, for example, French wine from France. In normal trade, if we bring French wine in here, we pay for it by exporting, I don't know, Kansas wheat to France. You know, we work and produce and we exchange. But if the dollar becomes a global currency, it means that for decades, we as a nation can send across to them little green pieces of paper that cost absolutely nothing to produce. They send us wine, they send us iron ore, they send us, you know, all the things of life that produced over there that we buy, and we buy a lot. And all we have to give is little green pieces of paper because they hold those. They accept that, and that gives us the benefit of what they produce without having to give them anything of what we produce. And when that stops, when another country or a group of countries, which is more likely what's going to happen next, a group of countries like China, India, or the BRICS, if you know about them, include South Africa and Brazil and India, if they develop alternatives, then those subsidies will go to them and not to the United States. And then we can see a decline in the United States, which will suddenly be so sharp and so palpable that the kinds of conversation we're having now will be the ones that are happening in the corner pub because everybody kind of knows.
Thank you so much, Professor Richard Wolff, for joining us today on another episode of The Watchdog. We hope to be joined by you again in future. And thank you to the viewers today. It's been great to talk to you.
My pleasure, and I'd be glad to do it again if the opportunity arises.
Thank you very much. You're the best.